moment. So I gotta listen to music when I talk to people. It helps me focus a little bit. I have a very wild mind. So I'm sure you might know me. Or maybe you know, it really doesn't matter. My name is Gabe. And I'm here to talk about philosophy. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, why would we want to talk about philosophy? Well, the very beautiful thing about philosophy is that it's the foundation of all human innovation, all human thought, all human creativity. Because without philosophy, we wouldn't have thought of asking why. The most important question, why, right? Now, to understand the reason why is so important, we must really analyze, you know, our history. But we don't really have to do that necessarily right now. But you could just think about it like this, right? Let's say somebody just gives you a PS5, right? Why? Because with just that PS5, you just have a PS5. But why do you have a PS5, right? That's kind of a silly example. I can get into very, you know, more detailed examples like science, physics stuff, but I don't think we want to hear about that. I'm not even here to talk about that, actually. I'm here to kind of talk about consciousness and how consciousness is very interesting, right? The reason why I'm talking about this is because I recently watched a video on how the brain works, and I don't have a full understanding of it, but from my understanding of what the video described, it was detailing basically like when you have, let's say, you know, because you have two parts of your brain. You have the left and right brain, and they have different functions, right, in short. And if you kind of disconnect that connection between the left and the right, you're still able to function, but the thing is that your consciousness is kind of almost like split between two identities that were, already there previously, but without that connection. It's basically like I don't really know how to explain it that well because it's kind of hard for me to fathom, right? But the way he explained it was that essentially one half would be able to, let's say, observe their surroundings, but not really have like a specific kind of way to really describe everything. It would kind of just have a very surface level, you know, way of describing things. So I would say like, oh, a phone, right? But I wouldn't be like, oh, a phone, right? You know, I use this to call with It'd be, oh, a phone, but the other side of the brain would be like, oh, yeah, I could use this to call people. So what I'm really trying to lead up here, and I have it right here in my notes actually, is let's see, what did I write down? You know, sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget things, which is why it's important to, you know, write notes down. How do we know that we're not, you know, multiple kind of? How do we know that, you know, we're not just one separate consciousness? That's what I was kind of thinking about when I read, when I watched this video, right? It's like, how do we know that we're actually not alone, right? Because I mean, everything we think of is in the language that we're proficient in, usually. You might think in images, right? But it's like, that's only one aspect of our conscious mind, right? But if the thing is that there's layers to it, and you could think about it in a biological standpoint, where like, oh yeah, the layers are meant for survival. You could think about it in a more philosophical sense. You could think about it in any way, right? But it doesn't change the fact that our brain has many different layers, right? And it's kind of interesting to think about because it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like you don't really usually think about it, you know. And I think that's actually part of, you know, your consciousness. There's just the action of doing without, you know, or rather the action of doing unknowingly, or I guess it would be like your subconscious, right? And so, yeah, overall, like, how do we know that we are not alone? Like, how do we know that we are just one being, one living organism? And yeah, what if we're just like, what if we're just like multiple, things all in one, right? Like, what if we have different people inside of us that we don't even know about? And it's kind of interesting because with that, it's kind of like, if there's like multiple, versions of yourself, right, or and multiple layers of yourself, right, which one's the real us, and which one is the one that matters the most, right? Which one's the most important, and which one decides our decisions? You can argue maybe it's a mixture, maybe it is just solely one, but do we really know, right? Do we really know how it really works inside of our mind? I guess the purpose of just me thinking about this is I'm trying to kind of get a better understanding of everything, right? Trying to like understand how you don't need to be confined to one layer of yourself. You don't need to be confined to one way of thinking. You have the potential to be anything, right? If you have different layers of yourself that you don't even know about, then how can you confine yourself to that one piece of yourself that you don't like? If I don't like myself because I think I'm stupid, well, there's also a lot of parts of me that I don't realize every day, and on top of that, there's parts of myself that I might not even there's parts of myself that other people may not even realize. And so it's kind of like you shouldn't really be so harsh on yourself. And it's kind of something that it's hard to put into action. It's easy to say, but once you put into action, it's not something that's like a piece of cake. It's very difficult. It's very painful sometimes. It's very brutal, right? But that's kind of like anything, right? The path to glory, path to success, a path to enlightenment. A lot of it requires you to ask yourself such important questions. It requires you to ask why. Why this, why that? It requires for you to dig deeper into a section of yourself, in a section of your surroundings, right? And it makes you see things differently. It makes you need to kind of analyze things differently, just so that way you could get new information. Because without that new information, you'll always be the same person. Right? Maybe you'll change a little bit every day, right? But you're not going to change as much as the guy who's like every day, right? He's like, let's say he questions everything, like I was just saying, right? He questions everything, and he like carefully analyzes everything, without assumption, previously. And if he does, he's willing to be wrong, right? If you're willing to lose, if you're not willing to lose, but if you allow yourself to lose or fail, I believe that you're more successful than somebody who's never allowing themselves to kind of witness failure. Because if you cannot witness failure in his eyes, then I believe you're a true failure. And I believe that the failure isn't the lack of success, but the lack of becoming enlightened, the lack of becoming a more profound thinker, a more profound person who's able to have more creativity and broader perspectives. And that's the issue with our society, right? It's we often see people, who kind of live their entire lives without any meaning, right? And part of that is because they don't ever ask themselves the bigger question, right? And sometimes it's like, it's kind of hard if you're not born with that, innate curiosity, and it's even harder when you don't have somebody there to like push you to do it, because really this is one of those journeys you have to do by yourself, right? And it's kind of like you have to talk to yourself, right? You have to talk to those other consciousnesses, those other selves, because there's different parts here, right? There's different parts of yourself, right? I mean, if you look at many different philosophies, throughout the world, right? I haven't really done enough literature on this, but let's use martial arts because I'm currently doing research on martial arts. Um, the thing with martial arts, it's not going to be the same as like multiple personalities, but it's the same thing with struggle, right? Bruce Lee, right? He believed that pain was your teacher, right? Struggle is essential for growth. Pain is essential for growth, right? So, in a world where you're born to not only be afraid of, or you're born and bred to not only fear pain, because inherently, like, pain is one of those things where it's like, you're not meant to kind of want to be in pain, right? Who wants to be in pain, right? But we're brought into a world where you're meant to kind of be more indulgent and allow yourself to kind of indulge in the ability to not have to struggle and not have to worry about things, right? And because so many people are so comfortable with their lives, they don't really get to experience the true value of struggle. And I think sometimes struggle can originate from the source of the why, and sometimes struggle can even be it could be the other way around, right? The why can be originated from the struggle that you experience. And I won't ramble too much more, but because I'm a bit tired. I don't know if you could tell. But long story short, overall, right? All I'm really trying to say, if you think that you're very simple-minded, if you think that there's not much to you, you're very average Joe. I mean, I think you're failing yourself because you're not, you're providing yourself with the opportunity to try something and struggle. You don't have to be the best at anything, right? Unless that's your goal, then that's a whole different story, right? But seeking perfection it's a whole nother thing, right? And seeking perfection is not ideal. It's not realistic because it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as perfection. But anyways, yeah, back to what I was saying, right? It's like if you don't kind of, if you don't question your life, if you don't question your life and you just let yourself be mediocre, then that is kind of like a waste to your potential and to your future. And I think you owe it to yourself to provide yourself with something more than that. But that's my 5 cents of advice. Well, I'll see you later.